So yeah, it was really nice. I've talked to Amy a couple of times over the last year or so about the seeing red thing, and I think it's amazing because, hear me, I'm well past, menopausal side of things, but I've had a lifetime of working in businesses, and it's really that where I came from was I'm an accountant, basically. I'm a qualified accountant, and because I was both female and involved in the administration of companies, I was the person that had to organise the sanitary bin contracts, and it always was very frustrating because we seemed to pay a lot for really not very much, and you didn't have much choice. It just seemed like, okay, one of these days there must be a better way of doing this, because I'd even see, well, you'd have things like yes, your sanitary bins have got to be discreet. Okay, yes, but they're in the toilet, so why do they have to be discreet? I don't know, but they're not very discreet when they carry them in and out of our reception. There are other things where the last place I worked at, we had head office reception, we had ladies' loos all over this site, but the guys would come in to do the collections, if indeed they came, early in the morning, and they'd try and find a warehouseman who would take them around to all these places. And of course, they never really did get cleared properly. So it's just like, oh, this is so frustrating. There must be a better way. Anyway, sometime later, I had the opportunity of not working for a little while. And I thought, well, do I want to go back to finance? What else could I do? And I thought that, okay, I said there must be a better way. I'll try and work on this. So I basically started to work out how we could do sanitary disposal without having to have somebody coming to and from a business at regular intervals, which had no relationship to how much waste was being produced and costing quite a lot. And then you had contracts, which are always dodgy to organise. You're never really very sure what you were signing up for. So I started with that, and eventually I was able to patent some bins, design and patent these bins, and I've launched those. So those are now out in the market, and I have quite a lot of archaeological customers because some of the things which are very specific to disposable sanitary bins suits archaeology sites very well. What I will say, however, is I'm not a qualified waste management in any way, but I've spent 10 years in the industry, and I'll tell you, I probably know more about the legislation that applies to bins and a lot of the people that actually operate service contracts. So I have a bit of a mission, really, a bit of a mission. And so what I want to give you at the end of this is the confidence that you know what you're supposed to be providing, you know what the options are, and I'm not just going to talk about my bins because that's wouldn't be right at all. What your obligations are for the disposal of hygiene waste, and also to finally think, oh, actually, this is not a nasty job, not a nasty job at all. So that's what I'm going to cover. I hope you like the swan and the beach and everything. They came as standard photos, but hey, I just rather like those. So archaeology sites can be complicated, and they can be complicated even if they're voluntary community groups operating those sites, and they're very complicated if they're commercial sites. So the sort of things that are characteristics of archaeology sites is that often in remote locations, there's my beach, that's a remote location, isn't it? And that can mean that they also don't have addresses. So if you are trying to organise a contract for somebody to come and collect your bins, A, they won't want to sign a contract for a short period, and they won't be able to find you. And so that the service you're likely to get is maybe poor. Quite a lot of commercial archaeology sites are part of complex construction sites as well. So you have to find your way in, or your contractor would have to find your way into the appropriate place and then get escorted round, which is, again, nobody really wants to do that, do they? And caring for all gender requirements. This this is such a relatively new concept, if I can put it that way. When I was first dealing with these bins, it just didn't arise. It was mostly, even the Portaloo people didn't want to talk about periods and sanitary bins or anything like that. So this is a great thing that we now can look after more people more easily. The other thing about archaeology sites is that you may have a mix of employees and volunteer workers, and the legislation between those two groups is different. So, for instance, the workplace regulations don't apply to volunteer workers, but if you have one single employee anywhere on your site, then they will apply. So as soon as you have a mass of volunteer workers, then they may be less used to dealing with waste legislation and all of these things. So hopefully disposable bins, as opposed to contract type bins, are the way to go, just to make it really simple. So if we look at the legislation, it's a question, is it a legal requirement to provide sanitary bins? These are often things that are thrown at people as you have to provide sanitary bins. You have to have a sanitary bin waste collection service and are allowed to do it yourself. You need a special type of waste license. And of course then, what are you going to be doing about your duty of care waste transfer note? Oops. And then, of course, human hygiene waste, hazardous stuff, infectious stuff, blood stuff, clinical. And all of a sudden people are going, oh no, I can't deal with all that, I'm not allowed. Well, pretty much, let's have a say. Number one, yes, you do have to provide sanitary bins. Do you have to have a sanitary bin waste collection? No. Is a special type of license required? No. What do you do about duty of care waste transfer notes later? Is human hygiene waste hazardous, clinical, or infectious? No. So if we look at the actual legislation, and I think maybe you could publish this, Joe, there's the workplace regulations 1992, and you can tell them it's from 1992 because the wording talks about sanitary conveniences and not sanitary bins, not washroom facilities or anything like that. So the regulations only say that washroom facilities should be suitable and sufficient. And there's an accompanying code of practice which actually goes so far as to say in toilets used by women, suitable means should be provided for disposing of sanitary dressings. So yeah, we're on it here. Goodness knows they ought to rewrite this, anyway. So what happens when we've got remote, temporary and construction sites? So the workplace regulations say that at temporary work sites, all of these things should be provided so far as reasonably practical. So there are going to be very few places where these things are not going to be reasonably practical to supply. That's a very useful bit of wording there. And then as far as construction sites are concerned, this is where it gets a bit complicated and I'm going to duck out somewhat, but it's worth, if you've got if you're part of a construction site, to understand how that legislation controls the workplace regulations and where the construction regulations come in and where the normal workplace regulations come in, if I can put it that way. So, but if you're running a construction site, you ought to be well up on understanding those regulations anyway. So what is a suitable provision? Well, you could literally provide a pedal bin or even a purchased sanitary bin with a liner. Now, this is not going to be a favourite with staff members and it leaves you in the, oh, this is a nasty job. Or it may even leave you with a cleaning company that say, oh no, we don't do that. That's not our job. We don't do sanitary bins. Sorry. And then you think, oh dear. So at the other end of the scale, you can have a service contractor coming in, so they can put the bins in there. They should take the bins away at regular intervals, although I have noticed that one of the market leaders in this sort of thing has apparently gone over to liners only. So that means that the bins are not likely to be being taken away, and therefore, who can comment, what's happening with the cleanliness of the bins that are there. So my alternative, and there are other ways of doing this, is that you can use disposable bins. And these were designed to take away the service contractor costs, take away the mileage driven to and from site at regular intervals, totally unrelated to whether the bins are full or not. And it allows providers to deal with their own site-specific issues. So site-specific issues we've already talked about from archaeology, but in other places, it may be that people are not in for a lot of the time. The sites are only being used for part of the time, or there's a security issue, or they just have a very low budget and they just want to do it themselves. All sorts of individual specific issues get covered by using a disposable bin. And so we're going to talk about sanitary bin contracts. So there is a lot of myths surrounding sanitary bins. We talked about some of those implications earlier about waste being clinical, infectious, or hazardous. It is none of those, none of those. So even though it is none of those, nobody really wants to get terribly close to the actual contents of the sanitary bin. And that's why, again, disposable bins are good, or service contracts if that is suitable for you. And where does all this come from? Where can we find this out, and who tells us what is supposed to be produced to be provided in the way of sanitary bins? And when I first started designing, the legislation was buried. You've got a little bit of information from here, and a little bit of information from there, and some of it was negative. So because you didn't have to do this, you were allowed to do something else, but it was really a pain. So now the environment agencies of Scotland, England, Wales, and Northern Ireland have made it really clear that only producers of significant amounts of hygiene waste need a specific collection. So what's significant? So in a very British sort of way, they've been generalistic about this. So rather than being very, very specific, what they've said is that if you're going to produce more than 7 kilograms in any waste collection, then you ought to have a separate waste collection. Now, as you can imagine, 7 kilograms of hygiene waste is quite a lot. And if you think about it, the more people you have, the more loos you have, the less likely that you're going to produce 7 kilograms in any one waste collection, because you'll be emptying one bin or a different bin, and you'd be entering more frequently. So there'd be almost no sites that are going to break that 7 kilogram limit. We're talking places where there's large amounts of throughput of people, if who actually need to have waste collections. So that's about the provision. So you can do it very simply, you can do it very complicated, and my bins, just to push them slightly, somewhere in between where you've got control of that. Now, then the question is, oh yes, but can we put hygiene type wastes into general business waste, or any other waste for that matter? And the interesting thing is that hygiene waste, and we're talking whether it's ostomy bags, whether it's adult nappies, whether it's menstrual products, or any of these sort of similar waste products, all of those are covered by the same legislation. And all of those wastes, when they're part of your general waste, that's in the house, in the home, or in business, or even if you're a community group, they come under something called the waste codes. And the waste code for municipal waste which is 200301, is exactly the same for household waste, and it's exactly the same for general business waste. One you pay for through the business route, and one is collected by your local council, which is included in your council tax, but it's the same waste stream. So where can we find this guidance from the environment agencies? And there is a huge document called WM3, Waste Classification Guidance to the Classification and Assessment of Waste Technical Guidance. So if you do a search on WM3, and you'll find that deep within the .gov site. And there's a specific example which covers all this hygiene waste, and it calls hygiene waste in a group of waste called offensive wastes, which I think is a bit offensive in itself. And I guess it may have been a good idea when, well, yes, if you were a service contractor trying to persuade people that they didn't want to deal with this, then they'd call it offensive waste, wouldn't they? Hey, but it isn't. So in WM3, you have to go to about page 100 and Lordy knows what, and there's an example 4, and it says segregation of this waste as discrete waste stream. There's the 7 kilogram, and it says non-health care businesses like householders may dispose of smaller quantities in their mixed or black bag waste without it affecting the classification or management of the waste. So there you go, that's where it is, and it's all there for everybody to see in clearly, thank goodness. So duty of care waste transfer notes, these may be held over your head. They may also be charged extra if you've got a contract. But if you manage your hygiene waste within the limits and you put that amount of waste into your normal black bag, business waste, you don't need a separate waste transfer note. And if you are on a contract and the supplier is charging you for your waste transfer note, .gov.uk, you can find a link where you can produce your own waste transfer note, and you don't need to get charged for it. And you certainly don't need any special waste license to manage your hygiene yourself. So there we go. Those are the things I'd like to talk about. If you don't mind, I'm just going to show you one of our bins set up. And this time I'm going to show you a leopard print one because it seems to go down very well with people in archaeology. And so this is one of the bins. This is the leopard print bin. And if you can see, that is the lid. Oops, does that lid show very well? Lid comes up. There's a panel inside, so what's in is in. So it acts very much like an ordinary sanitary bin. And then when they're full, on the back, there's a black bin bag in a sleeve on the back, so you don't even have to go and hunt the bin bag. The whole bin and contents into that black bin bag, and it all just goes straight and securely into your business waste. And then you set up another one, and we send them out. These are the other funky colours. This is silver grey. That's for people who want to stay discreet. This is mint, because we like mint and it's fashionable. This is pink. Blokes are very fond of ordering pink for ladies. And this is purple. So you've got a choice of colours as well. So those bins are on our website, but if you would like a free sample to try one of those out, if you can go to our website, fill your details in on the contact us page, we will happily send them out. Just get, oops, what have I done? I've lost it slightly.
Susan, was that your last slide?
It was.
So we can share the link with everybody who's here today, so don't worry too much about that one.
So hopefully that gives you a bit of confidence to go out there and not worry about whether you're breaking the law on waste legislation or provision legislation or anything else. And it just becomes a matter where you order it with the loo paper, the cleaning products and everything else. It just becomes so simple. And that's where people should be, not